Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Family Sedan channel. Do you believe that the SEC is taking a regulation by enforcement approach rather than providing regulatory clarity in the crypto and blockchain space? Because I sure as hell believe that. Do you believe that? Well, if you do believe that, I'll have you know that a former SEC chief, John Reed Stark, was the SEC Office of Internet Enforcement chief. He says that you're full of nonsense. I know he said that it's an utter falsehood, and I think he also said utter nonsense at some point in this article that he wrote just yesterday. And this is interesting for a number of reasons. First of all, I've frequently said, out of all the attorneys on the planet that side with the SEC's position, regarding the SEC v. Ripple case, and you could even broaden that out to say just in general the SEC's approach to regulating or lack thereof crypto. Almost all the people that agree with it, all the attorneys, they happen to be at the SEC. So what you find very frequently is even former SEC employees, even the ones that were attorneys, once they leave the SEC, they're critical of the SEC. So what we have here is something a little bit more rare. John Reed Stark, he's still parroting the nonsense that the SEC is actually arguing today. And so I'm going to share with you some of what he had to say here, but as I'm sharing this, I'm wondering, will John Reed Stark's hollow words fool anyone? Because he's trying to convince people that there is no actual regulation by enforcement. He's actually trying to fool people to think that. And I say fool because it's nonsense, but word he use that word too, just incorrectly. But does he actually believe what he's arguing? That's what I'm curious. Does he have another motive? Is there an unknown? And the reason I say that is I don't always question everyone's motives when I find out they have different perspectives than me. But this is so absurd that it's very difficult for me to take people seriously when they just tell everybody that's operating in the space in the entire United States, everybody operating in space, because we all have pretty well the same opinion. There's not sufficient clarity. They're all wrong and he's right. It is so lopsided and so obvious, it's hard for me to actually take the claim that there's no regulation by enforcement seriously. So, but even if he did agree, I'm still sitting here wondering, even if he means what he's saying, why do people that hold his opinion that there's no regulation by enforcement, everything's perfectly clear, from that perspective, how come they never push for clarity in regards to secondary market transactions for cryptocurrencies? They don't even want that touched. Why don't they touch that part? Really grinds my gears, folks. But before going further, I do want to be clear, I do not have a legal or financial background of any kind. I am not offering legal or financial advice. And you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto-related topics, but just as a hobby and just for fun. And so here is John Reed Stark. That's the gentleman on your screen to the left. And Cointelegraph ended up writing up an article exactly on this topic titled "Former SEC Chief Blasts Bogus Catchphrase, Regulation by Enforcement." A former Securities and Exchange Commission official has slammed cryptocurrency lobbyists for labeling SEC enforcement actions as regulation by enforcement, calling the term a bogus big crypto catchphrase. And that's a quote. John Reed Stark, a former chief of the SEC's Office of Internet Enforcement and a crypto skeptic, opined in a January 22nd post that the argument is sorely misguided, as it was just how securities regulations worked. Yeah, and I'll pause to note that regarding that instance where there were a couple entities that constituted, I can't remember the percentage, it may have been like 52% of the network hash on the Bitcoin blockchain. He looked at that data, and I covered this at the time, but he shared that data on Twitter, and he says, how is Bitcoin not a security? Think about that, folks. He's arguing in 2023 that Bitcoin is a security. I'm like, bitch, even Kim Jong-Gensler has publicly stated that Bitcoin is not a security. What? So that's the level of ridiculousness that we're working with this guy. Piece continues. Litigation and SEC enforcement are actually how securities regulation works, he argued. The flexibility of SEC statutory weaponry is an SEC hallmark, enabling SEC enforcement to keep fraud in check. In fact, the repetitive chorus of regulation by enforcement is not only a misguided, deflective effort designed to tap into sympathetic libertarian and anti-regulatory mores, it's also utter nonsense. End quote. So this is the type of guy we're. So again, he's insisting there's no regulation by enforcement, just enforcing the existing laws, which means everybody else, including you, well, I'm crazy, you listening, you're crazy, all the entrepreneurs in the space are all crazy for thinking that there's not clarity. But even if you set aside, like even in a case where, like for instance, library, which is already lost, which I think is a very poor ruling, and perhaps it wasn't sufficiently argued, from library side because they weren't defending against all the prongs of the Howey test, which they could have. But setting that aside, what about all of the participants in the space, like Naomi Brockwell, who attorney John Deaton is representing, because he filed an amicus brief after the loss, in fact, and bringing up the point that we don't know what these transactions are, because Naomi Brockwell owns X amount of LBC tokens, library credit tokens, but she's never bought them and she's never sold them. What is that for her? She's using them for the utility, by the way, because it helps get exposure on the platform. She's a content creator. So what is that? And it's just, even when it comes to that, even after a loss, no, we don't know. No clarity needed. See, that's why I keep saying these people, they're not good people. I don't think they're operating in good faith. Do you? Because again, you get the win, and still you don't want because you don't want to cede any ground. And this guy's not even at the SEC anymore, which makes me question, what's the motive for him? What is in it for him? I see he's got this consulting firm. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But it's so against the grain. And again, you don't normally see this from people that leave the SEC. What I typically see from people that speak out on this topic after leaving the SEC is they recognize that there's some room for improvement, which is the rational approach. I know to all of this. Anyway, Peace continues. According to Stark, when the SEC Office of Internet Enforcement was created in 1998, there were critics who said SEC regulations were too vague and regulation by enforcement would stifle the growth of the internet. In hindsight, relying upon the flexibility of securities regulation to police the internet cleared out the more egregious instances of early online securities fraud, he argued. Moreover, vigorous online SEC enforcement efforts also paved the way for legitimate technological innovations to flourish, rendering markets more efficient and transparent, thereby allowing investors more opportunities for success, he said. Oh, hold on. The degree to which we're crying out for regulatory clarity in the crypto space, it is nothing like what happened 2 decades ago. Does anybody actually dispute that? It's just like, to what degree does he even believe what he's saying? It's like, because the stuff I've seen him say is so absurd. I mean, Bitcoin even in 2023? Why isn't that a security? That's something you're tweeting in 2000, or maybe it was the end of 2022 when he tweeted, whatever. Splitting hairs, doesn't matter. Very difficult to take this guy seriously. Very difficult. Peace continues. Over the last few years, the SEC has launched more than a few high-profile cases against crypto companies such as Ripple and Library, prompting some critics to argue the SEC has been using enforcement actions to develop the law on a case-by-case basis rather than creating clear regulations. And again, one of the reasons that this is so obviously disingenuous with the likes of John Reed Stark, anybody that argues this type of crap, you go down the prongs of the Howey test and you break into this, and even if you just want to talk about the common enterprise aspect, which is usually the one that I like to talk about first because it's easiest to highlight the problems here, is if you're talking about, is there not a common enterprise? Well, even if you could reasonably argue that at some juncture in time there is, and let's make up a hypothetical, let's just say that there is. Well, at a certain point, if it's the network itself and there's a token on a network, well, once a network becomes sufficiently decentralized, how can there be a common enterprise? It becomes a situation where it's very clearly, if anything, a common interest, which is not a common enterprise. Common interest is not a legal standard. Common enterprise is a legal standard. So when you get that, when does that happen? And so here's the problem. So we have all this suing, all this regulation by enforcement, which is a real thing despite what this guy says. And he's just pretending like, we already know what is and what it wouldn't be considered an investment contract, what wouldn't be a security. But if something is sufficiently decentralized, can it not change from being a securities transaction to a non-securities transaction? Because even Jay Clayton says that type of morphine can happen outside of crypto. And he gave this, and I've talked about this before on the channel, he gave this hypothetical where he's talking about a laundry company that could sell a laundry coin, but then maybe that coin initially it's because again the laundry company hasn't been built yet, but that could start to sound like you're satisfying the prongs of the Howey test: investment of money, and the efforts of others, and common enterprise, the laundry firm, so you can start to satisfy those. But what if that token, that actual token, what if it's a physical token even, and then you can use it to do laundry there? Well, is it still a security? And so Jay Clayton was talking about this hypothetical years ago. Okay, how does that apply to crypto? When is it sufficiently decentralized? Where is that clarity? And that's just one prong of the Howey test right there. And he's acting like it's so clear out there. This is the type of crap that you hear from the likes of Kim Jong-Ginzer. Of course it's not clear. I don't find people that say that it is. It's hard for me to take them seriously. I frequently wonder, do you have some more motive out there I'm just unaware of? I don't know how you could be intellectually honest and state these things as if everybody just knows, and everybody in the crypto space we all just happen to believe the same thing with rare exception. We're all wrong, all of us, really, because this didn't happen with the internet. This isn't happening with any other asset class. It's not happening with stocks. Nobody's saying that there's not sufficient clarity when it comes to, the questions of buying and selling stocks. Why is it a question here? Why does everybody agree except for you, John Reed Stark? Might you be analyzing this incorrectly? Methinks the answer is yes. And so here's a couple tweets from Brian Armstrong, Coinbase founder and CEO. He said, and this is on September 20th last year, one of the strongest policy arguments for cryptocurrency is that it's a national security issue. The U.S. missed on semiconductors and 5G, which is now largely manufactured offshore. It can't afford to have cryptocurrency go offshore as well. Same for every country, by the way. Regulation by enforcement has a terrible chilling effect, and rhetoric matters. We've already seen a huge amount of crypto talent, asset issuers, and startups go offshore. Exactly. So is it just all these people that they want to go to, they want to break the rules, but they just can't in the United States. They want to break all the rules, so they go to some other country where things are more lax and they're going to wreck people's lives. Is that what's actually happening? Do you actually think that, John Reed Stark? Because that's an absurd concept. Piece continues. Ripple General Counsel Stuart Alderoty has also questioned the approach in a November 28th post, citing the high-profile collapse of FTX and the related contagion that claimed BlockFi as evidence it doesn't work. Stuart Alderoty, it's November 28th, stated, another SEC regulation by enforcement success story. Months after $100 million BlockFi/SEC deal, BlockFi in bankruptcy to $275 million loan outstanding to FTX with BlockFi, unknown amounts owed to BlockFi from FTX. Nothing ever registered. Fines paid. With whose money? Consumers decimated. Exactly. Piece continues. In Stark's opinion, however, the SEC is following the law with its actions, and he cited legal victories where courts have found in its favor. Indeed, courts have upheld a broad array of SEC cases involving crypto-related offerings. In fact, in the 127 crypto-related enforcement actions already filed by the SEC has not lost a single case. Yeah, okay, except for this is a misrepresentation of what's going on, because a strong number of those don't even include a cryptocurrency. For the ones that do, there were ICOs, and then there are also a lot of firms that were, I mean, come on, let's be real. You get sued by the SEC, if you're not mega, if you don't have a mega war chest like Ripple, you capitulate. Game over, because your life is going to be wrecked otherwise. So let's not pretend like these aren't real considerations here. But again, he's just hoping that people reading his comments would know stuff like that. But I do, and you do, right? Piece continues. Rather, the SEC typically adopts a reasoned common sense application of the basic requirements of the federal securities laws to new and evolving market conditions and technologies, he added. Timothy Cradle, a former Celsius employee and the current director of regulatory affairs at the Blockchain Intelligence Group, replied to Stark's post questioning whether clear regulations would ultimately be a better policy than regulation by enforcement. I agree with the argument. However, would it be too much to ask that the SEC and CFTC issue guidance much in the same way FinCEN did in 2019, he said. If big crypto is saying it needs clear rules of the road, wouldn't it make sense for the regulators to clarify in an official communication, such as guidance, that their rules do apply to cryptocurrencies? Cradle added. Yeah, well, that would be the bare minimum of like where you could start and where it might be reasonable to have a bit of a discussion on this. Really burns my biscuits, folks. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the Moon Family Sedan.